still people in my life that I kind of avoid the question because it is my deep, dark secret, right? Like I had no intention of this being something that is the thing I talk about and teach to the world, right? And so, I mean, I would have thought anybody was crazy to listen to me about this stuff, right? Like I had no intention of that. So this was my deep, dark secret. I was going to get my house under control in a couple months, and then I was going to start writing about things that I actually felt qualified to write about.
Hi, and welcome back to Old School. Today, our teacher in class will be Dana K. White, the author of Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy House. And we have such a wonderful time going over her journey and how a messy house is just more of the metaphor, and how different people are wired to handle certain things, and how the Lord gets us to our processes. It was just such a wonderful encounter. She was very raw and open about some of the things she felt during her journey, and that resonated with me with my book, Butterfly Stitches. And so I'm just really excited to have her here today, and hope that once you've heard the podcast that you'd want to run out and get her book. So we want to welcome to class Dana.
Yeah, so I was born messy. I mean, I was the messy child. I was the messy, I had the messy desk in school. I have a memory of, well, it's not just a memory. It's like a very, moment in my life where my teacher, who I was the teacher's pet in fourth grade, like she loved me. I loved her. And I remember her calling me out into the hallway one day. It was a Monday morning, and it was a little Christian school. And so there was, church that went on in the classrooms on Sunday. And I guess she had been in there for some reason while this church thing was going on, and they were playing a game, and my desk got knocked over, and just trash and stuff and everything went everywhere. And she was horrified. And I remember her talking to me about it in the hallway. And I was the kid who never got taken in the hallway for any kind of behavior or discipline, nothing like that. I was the perfect kid. And I just remember her being so completely confused that it was my desk. Do you know what I mean? Because it didn't compute in her brain that I, who got perfect grades and who was, respectful and did all the things I was supposed to do. And she thought that I was her teacher's pet. I mean, everybody called me that, like this was one of those relationships with the teacher. And so it was me that was the total slob. Like I just remember her face and her just being like, we got to talk about this, and I have multiple stories over the years similar to that. But so yeah, this was a lifelong struggle for me. And I assumed that once I got married, it wouldn't be a challenge anymore. I mean, like I literally thought, and I'm pretty sure I even said out loud multiple times, that of course this will be easy once I care enough. Like I always thought, that's not my life, right? Like my life isn't my space and all this, because I was always busy and doing other things. And I thought once it matters to me, it won't be hard anymore. It mattered to me. It was just as hard. And then that added on the like, wait, why is this still hard? Like, even though it matters to me now, even though I am putting time and effort into it, not that I didn't care before, but you know what I mean? There's just a shift in that.
Sure.
And then I still thought, once I'm a stay-at-home mom, what else will I have to do? Of course, it'll be easy at that point. So I would always just look to that future time in my life where all of a sudden I was just going to wake up and it wasn't going to be a struggle anymore. And then I had kids and became a stay-at-home mom and realized that even people who used to be organized, once they have kids, tend to struggle. And it became even more of a challenge. And at that point, that was when I started to realize, I think there's something wrong with me. Like, this is not just, because I was trying. I was literally trying so hard and still couldn't do it. And it was my focus. I mean, obviously I had kids and stuff too, but that was my focus. And so, I wanted to be a writer. That was my life dream. I was a theater arts teacher before I had kids, so I have that creative thing boiling in my soul at all times, right? And when I became a mom, I thought, okay, I want to use writing as my creative outlet. And I didn't realize at the time that I have an entrepreneurial spirit, that is what jazzes me so much. I now know that, but I thought I want to look at that. I don't know how to make writing a career, but then I found out about blogs and I was like, oh, okay, this would make sense for me to start a blog. This was in 2008, actually, when I discovered them. And I didn't start it for a year and a half, even though I desperately wanted to, because my house was a total disaster. It had always been a disaster, but I was like, I need to get this figured out before I jump into this thing. I know how I am with creative projects. It only gets so much worse during a creative project. And so I can't take this on unless I can get this house thing figured out. And I could not do that. Even though I was trying really hard. I could do great for a week or two and then life would happen. It would go back to worse than it was before. And every time that happened, I just felt more and more disheartened and scared to try again the next time, right? And so in August of 2009, my son, who is now 21, was going to kindergarten the next day. And that was his first day of kindergarten. And I was only going to have one kid out of 3 at home. And I thought, this is the time I should start a blog. Like, it makes sense because I was only going to have one kid. She could go down for a nap. I could write for an hour. And that was, it just made sense. But God had not cured me like I had begged him to. I'd said, God, please make me organized. I mean, literally on my knees crying for years, but I had asked him so many times and but it was confusing to me because I was like, why is it that I know God has put this desire to write in my heart? Like, I wanted to write to encourage women and to glorify him. And yet I couldn't do that because my house, and he wouldn't answer the prayer about my house. And that was when God was just like, write about that. And I thought, well, that's actually a really good idea, God. Okay.
He has them every now and then.
Right. And I thought I would do this temporarily. I was like, okay, I'm going to do a temporary practice blog so I can kind of start to learn about what this world is, because I was seeing people like turn it into a business and stuff. And I thought I'll write about this anonymously until I get my house under control. And what, like 2
because
months
anyone
later?
who knows you, who reads your blog, is going to be like, imposter.
I did not tell anyone. I didn't even tell my husband that I had he knew I had wanted to start a blog, but I didn't tell him I had done it. I didn't tell anybody. I made up a fake name. I went home and set up a new email address. My goal was that it never be traced back to me. Now, I called myself Noni, which is short for anonymous. My best friend's always like, isn't it Nani then? And I'm like, I made it up. I get to decide how it is pronounced.
Just leave me alone.
I know, right? But I didn't tell anybody. There's still people in my life that I kind of avoid the question because it is my deep, dark secret, right? Like I had no intention of this being something that is the thing I talk about and teach to the world, right? And so, I would have thought anybody was crazy to listen to me about this stuff, right? Like, I had no intention of that. So this was my deep, dark secret. I was going to get my house under control in a couple months, and then I was going to start writing about things that I actually felt qualified to write about. And the joke's on me. Here we are. It's 2024. 15 years later. Over 15 years later. And this is what this is the plan God had all along. I mean, this was his plan. This is the reason that he didn't
cure you,
make me organized, the way I was begging him to. Instead, he answered my prayer in a way that also turned it into my ministry. And like, that's a huge part of what I share is the reality of what that actual struggle looks like. You know, I mean, I hear from people all the time who tell me that what they need to see is those embarrassing pictures that I posted back in 2009, 2010, 2011, that I truly did not plan for anybody I knew to ever see that, right? And because I was anonymous, I was completely honest. And that was a huge part of it, right? Was starting to go down this road of not making excuses and not trying to be like, oh, you know, whatever. But no, I was just completely honest. And people need that. They need to see, oh, when she says was messy, she's not just saying
Don't
that.
get it wrong.
Like, it's for real.
I
I've got
feel
the
the
receipts.
same way about I never wanted to be a writer. And when the Lord asked me to write my book, it just published in November. It had to do with a lot of abuse. It's a memoir and it's a two-part one. And on my cover is, as they call it, daring. It's me naked with my arms around my knees. Wow. You don't see, it's not sexual. Right. And my niece did my makeup with having been beaten up. And people that come to me and go, the minute I saw that, I knew you know me and you understand what I've been through, and I want to understand what you have to say. And I think that's the same thing. I don't mean anything against wonderful Christian people or even secular, like counselors or whoever.
Yep.
But people who have not walked our road, it just doesn't have the same connection or resonance. So, and I think honestly, hon, I mean, there are more people who probably have your struggle than, but you use the word perfect like 3 or 4 times in your opening monologue.
I know it was a monologue. I talk and talk. Sorry.
No, you're fine. But I think perfectionists struggle with a different messiness. Because perfection is not what we're called to by any stretch of the imagination. And I had a mother who, during a remodel in our home, she dusted the 2x4s that were in a stack. That's how nuts she was about not having a messy home. So, you know, I think there are so many people who struggle with both sides of what you have to say. So I think it's perfect. And you're right. I think more people are going to resonate if you're honest and truthful and not like hiding over here. But has to be just like dieting. It has to be one of the even bigger addictions. I know we point out the big ones that are like sinful, like porn and alcohol and what have you. But I think like this struggle is a struggle of the heart. You know, my daughter, her room is crazy. She's 24 and she'll say things and not even realize sometimes like something off the cuff, like, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. I talked to her about, what if you get married or what if you have a roommate? Oh, I wouldn't do that. And then I was like, oh, so it's just me who gets that.
Well, okay, I'm gonna guess something about your daughter. Okay, I'm gonna guess that she's a lot of fun.
Oh, she's a blast.
And she's highly creative.
She is.
Yeah. Like those things go together, the creativity. And seriously, like the reason that I needed to be honest and the reason I could be honest because it was anonymous is like, I literally thought I was the only person out there who struggled the way that I did. That's one of the reasons why it didn't occur to me that this could ever even possibly turn into me teaching anything. Cause I was like, no, it's just me. I just need to get this out there. I just need to, you know, anonymously put it out there and figure it out. And the people who come to me are like, I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one who thinks the way that I think. Right. And so it isn't you. It's not that she does it. You know, I don't know how much of the book you've looked at, but like, you know, feeling understood is a huge, I mean, like you said, when people see your book cover, they go, she understands.
Right.
And then therefore it takes away that like curtain of shame that separates us from each other and is like, okay, now I can listen because I feel understood. Like I heard somebody one time And I've tried to look it up and find it, but it was basically like people aren't willing to change unless they feel accepted as they already are. And it feels like that's not what we're supposed to do to help people. Like, no, I need to
Fix
point
you.
out
Yeah.
your problems. That's part of it. And it's like, no, you need to understand this as a legitimate struggle. And I would have said the same thing and I would have meant it. The same thing that your daughter said. Like, I would have absolutely meant, well, of course I'm not going to do this.
Well, like you said, you thought when you got married, it would be
Absolutely.
different. She feels like when she moves out and it is accountable to somebody else. And I had somebody point out to me one time that I thought was really fascinating is that a lot of the things, there are some certain things, mothers and daughters have these things. She's an only
Absolutely.
child, like respect things and different things. They were like, well, she feels like you're safe. That's why she's willing to be those, even the ugly parts of her, or who. Not, and I'm not saying that a
I know what
messy
you
room
mean.
is
I know what you
ugly
mean.
or whatever,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. Those,
Yeah.
all of us, like you said, the acceptance of all of us. And I have always tried to have her understand that unconditional here, that what God taught me the day she was born, because she was a struggle to get here, and I had her old, was that it's 100%. There's nothing you can do to make my love more, and there's nothing you can do to make my love less. I would go to her book signing if she burned down an orphanage. I'd be like, okay, I'm here for you. So I understand. And I think, what's really kind of difficult too, a lot of times when people go through that specific type of struggle, because I had perfectionist girlfriends. But people clean up their house before you come over. Mm-hmm. You had a bunch of friends, guarantee you, throughout your lifetime who had the same struggle you do. They just managed to go shove it into drawers and cabinets before you came over. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, and I know you experienced that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, people ask, how is it different now versus how it was then? Well, I always say it took me 2 weeks to have people over before, because I would shove everything into my bedroom, because that's the one where we could lock the door. And then I would spend the next week cleaning, because you can't actually clean when there's clutter everywhere, And now I don't have to do that. I can open the house in 15 minutes, but also my perspective has shifted of people need to see that it's not always perfect. If it's a situation where I am able to get it the way I want it to be when people come over, then I absolutely need to do that. But I need to not let someone come over because my house is not the way I wish it was at the moment, right?
Right.
Because I just trust in the fact that, okay, God is bringing them to my door right now. I'm going to do the best that I can, and then I'm going to swallow my pride and say, for some reason, God needs them in my house right now, seeing it the way that it is right now. And because there's so many of us who just assume that we're the only one, and people need to know that they're not the only one. Or if they have I don't know how they would get the impression that I have it all together. I don't understand. But even if the home isn't the struggle, they need to see I've got struggles. I have them. Absolutely. and we all do.
Yeah,
of some sort.
The clutter or the messy is literal and internal as well. And anybody who thinks that this side of heaven, I think you even have a title like that of one of your chapters. Like it's that is not reality. We all have that, and we don't arrive until we're looking at the face of Jesus to that perfection. So, my ex would tease me too, because we had a house cleaner before my daughter was born, and I would clean up certain things before they came because I didn't want them to see that stuff.
Well, it's funny because I talk very openly about having a cleaner who comes to my house. And my husband, because I told him, I was like, when I hit this financial monthly amount, I want to have a cleaner. And he was like, can you do that with what you teach? Are you allowed to do that? And I was like, yeah, because
allowed.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, he was like, but will that mess up your business if you, and I was like, no. Like, when my first book came out, so 7 years, I didn't, right? Like, I figured it out and I did it on my own, but I talk very openly about the reality of that, because that is the reality of having someone to come and clean. You're not having them come to declutter and to catch up on all the stuff that needed to be done for the 2 weeks that they weren't there. And it's like, it isn't, it's wonderful, but it isn't magical. It also goes straight back to being messy within, 6 hours of them leaving, so if you're not doing the thing, so
Right.
but because that's the reality, right?
It doesn't make you less legitimate just because you have
Oh.
somebody come and do so.
Right.
Because that clean and messy are two different things.
Yeah.
That, it's great your house is clean, but the messy is about stuff being around, not because your house is dirty or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, okay. So when in going through, it was so hard not to, and I don't want to give away the farm because your book is coming out. We want people to go get your book, which is Jesus Doesn't Care About Your Messy Home. And I love that. Or your messy heart. That's what he's here for, So there were a couple of areas that I found that struck a chord for me. In chapter 4, you have a quote that says, "Because he healed, people followed." And talk a little bit more about that in regard to like the messy.
Yeah. I really struggled. It took me about 2.5 years to accept that this was actually the thing I was supposed to be writing about, right? Like I kept thinking for a long time that I was going to get this under control and start writing about something else. And it took a while, like I said, 2.5 years for God to show me that this was the actual ministry he had for me. In doing that, he was showing me the theme of this book, which is, Dana, I care about your heart. I've never been horrified by or upset by the fact that you struggle with a messy house. Like that's not a surprise to him. He created me the way that I am. This is part of how my brain works. He's like, that was never the issue. Your issue is I want your heart to be completely focused on me. And so he had showed me that this was not a spiritual failure, but at the same time, he was making it my ministry. And I was like, okay, but what? like you're giving me I want to serve you, God. And yet you're giving me this is the thing that I use as my ministry, that's my ministry. And he just showed me again and again and again, I think it was, I was studying John, the book of John that year. And in that, we're seeing Jesus as he is living here, as a man. And the thing that just kept sticking out to me again and again and again in every story was the purposefulness of every thing that he did, every word that he said, every reaction that he had to people, every interaction, everything that he did was so purposeful. And it showed me in this reality of, when he healed people, he helped them get past the thing that was so all-consuming that they couldn't have an eternal perspective because they were so bogged down in the things here that kept them from being able to think about or see eternity, which is the only thing that really matters, right? And so he would heal people as to help them be able to see eternity, to help them be able to focus on that. And he was just like, listen, this is a real need. And I knew the need more than other people. I wasn't just somebody who was like, oh, I'm naturally organized, I want to tell people how to be like me. No, I knew it because I knew the pain, right? And so I understood the shame and the pain. And so he was like, no, this is the actual thing I have for you to do, which is where this book comes in 15 years later as nothing matters without eternity, right? Like nothing matters without my relationship with Jesus. And so I don't want to leave that out.
Right.
get to talk about this, which is funny because it's like, at first I thought, well, I think I've talked enough about houses and everything, so I want to talk about Jesus. And Jesus was like, well, let's put those things together because this is what people actually want to hear from you. You know, like people, this is the subject matter that I've given you as a platform to share my faith.
Absolutely. I mean, and it is a beautiful parallel. And I think oftentimes, if it without that journey, you wouldn't be the subject matter expert. Because I think if somebody is naturally something, you can't put that onto other people. When I still do sort of, but I'm kind of running out of film. I have a photographic memory and a phonographic memory too. I can hear stuff. And in high school, people would want to have study groups, and I'd be like, I read it, and they were like, well, no, we need to memorize all, history, whatever, we need to memorize all this. And I'd say on page 86, the third paragraph down, it says this, and they're like, we hate you.
I had a professor in college who was saying one time, and I didn't understand it at the time, but he was basically saying, a girl had, wanted to be a teacher, and she had only ever made high A's her entire, education. And he said, well, you're going to be a terrible teacher. Well, I had always made A's, and I was like, but his point I see now in life is like, no, this is the thing I can teach because I understand the struggle. His point was, if you've never struggled, it's very hard to understand how people struggle. Now, I don't ever want to say that, somebody who is great at organizing doesn't need to be teaching it. They do, right? Like what I come in at, I don't teach people how to have color coordinated pantries, right? Like that. So somebody else needs to teach how to do that because a lot of people love that stuff, right?
Right.
That's not my role. My role is teaching people how to go from completely bewildered and overwhelmed and confused why this is so hard to, oh, okay, I get it now. I can do this.
Possible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Like that's my thing. But part of that is me being willing to accept that, first of all, that people need to hear that, because I always thought, why would I teach this? People only want to know about, perfection and how to have it all be amazingly beautiful and magazine worthy. And I'm like, oh, no, actually, we need to know this down and dirty stuff that I teach.
Right. We need to be able to accept, like, when the Lord does bring someone across our path, like you said, if some people, like, say from church, your small group needs someplace to go, and you've got 2 days notice to let them come over, are you going to turn away that gift of hospitality that the Lord gave you and that your home can accommodate because you don't have it perfect? And that is more of an affair of the heart and in dealing with our relationship with Jesus. So yeah. I think that's awesome. I think going through some of the excerpts that I was given, it was interesting to me that you used the word shame. Mm-hmm. And that at first I don't even know the right word for it, was taken maybe a little aback, because I was like, oh my goodness, how could anybody feel that way? And maybe because I've been a mom and I chose my daughter's time over doing the dishes on occasion or whatever. Mm-hmm. But talk a little bit about that. What do you mean in regard to that shame?
My problem was not just that I didn't do the dishes every once in a while. So I just want to be
right.
clear.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
That, the thought would cross my mind. And I know it crosses the mind of a lot of the people who follow me, who are at different stages of, if an emergency happened at the wrong time and authorities had to come into my house, would somebody report me to something? Like, so I'm talking about real mess. Okay. So, I'm not just talking about it not being perfect. I'm talking about, I always felt like I would have 2 rooms at a time that were basically unusable. Right. And so I would clean one out which really just meant moving all the stuff out of that one into another one, and then moving all the stuff out of, to another one. And then there would be two different rooms that were unusable, so it would just be, so it was never the whole house, but the whole house was a mess, right? I just had way more stuff than I could handle. So I just want to, like, it was a source of shame because it was embarrassing and I didn't want to let people inside. Like the thought of somebody just coming in for whatever reason, or a friend, I remember a friend needing to, like, they were in our neighborhood and her potty training son needed to use the bathroom. And so what do? You knock on your friend's door and you're like, oh my word, can you go to the bathroom? And I just remember being like, oh my word, I'm so embarrassed right now. Like, I'm so embarrassed. Not like she was going to call, but I'm just saying, like, at different levels, there were all different levels and those levels happened at different times. But it was a real source of shame because of the actual mess, but also because of I am an intelligent woman, right? Like, I am a successful, intelligent person who can do things that other people are like, wow, I was a very successful teacher. I did really, really well in school. And so I knew I was intelligent, and yet my house made me feel really dumb, because I was like, why is this hard? Other people seem to be able to do this. I am not able to do this. Like, and it's not that I haven't tried. So the feeling like something is wrong with me was a big part of the shame,
That's so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine because that's crippling in and of itself, what we hang on to from what we're going through or what we might go through. I wasn't sure how much of it was more about what you thought maybe other people, or if you felt some shame in regard to your relationship with Jesus about this.
I felt like I must be missing something spiritually, because there is an idea, and this is where this book comes in, and the purpose of this book is to dispel this idea. But there's an idea, because a lot, historically, let's look at when women had voices, right? Like, when did women have voices to speak about spiritual things? It was generally about stuff like this, right? So encouraging other women and trying to give advice and help, and then you put a spiritual spin on that. And I'm like, okay, well, if I can't do this thing, and I have, and according to the way people make it sound, a Christian woman's supposed to, like, have this beautiful home. That's her, what she's supposed to be doing. And I can't have the beautiful home. So is there something wrong with me as a Christian woman? Is there something wrong in my relationship with God that I can't seem to do this thing that, people seem to act like is what Christian women are supposed to be able to do easily, And so it brought this shame in that I'm missing something. What am I missing? I've had women come to me and say, okay, I'm trying to figure out what fruit of the Spirit am I missing that this is so hard. And I'm like, no, no, you can have all the fruits of the Spirit in a very messy home. I mean, like, so it's not a spiritual failure. And the thing is, a lot of people who talk about this stuff, even talking about, like, taking away the shame, talk about it from the perspective of someone who is so driven to have a perfect home that they can't stop cleaning, and they can't let anybody in if it's not absolutely perfect, and the aesthetics of it is so important to them that God has shown them it's okay to relax because my grace is sufficient for you. It's okay to relax, right? That's the kind of stuff I had heard on this subject, and I would hear that and go, yeah, being okay relaxing is not my problem, right? Like, this is not the issue. Like, it's not an issue that I need to, like, let up. And, the issue is that I can't do it. So what is wrong with me spiritually that I can't do it? I would love to be able to have my house perfect, and I just can't. And that is a different side of the same truth applies, right? Like God's grace is sufficient for us, and anything we try to do to earn his love means that we don't understand what he actually wants from us, because we don't understand our relationship with him if we're trying to be good enough to make him love us, because that's not possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't come with those caveats that we humans put on ourselves
Right.
and others, frankly. Wow. Well, it touched my heart, and I was like, I wasn't really sure. And so I did want you to be able to say that to the audience. And I think that absolutely, just like with the title of your book and my cover, I think when they hear something like that, it's immediate that they're like going to resonate with you. The other chapter that I really enjoyed, and it brings up some of the thought processes you have, or concepts as you call them, is chapter 10. And I don't know if there's only 3, but there's like 3 concepts that you kind of hit on without giving away the farm on the book. Can you say something briefly about those 3?
I have no idea what chapter 10 is about.
Okay.
You have to give me a title.
How I'm made versus just the way I am.
Yeah.
And you have the container concept, the clutter threshold, and one in, one out. And I think these sound amazing.
Yeah.
And I realize you can't give like the whole breadth of it.
I can.
Yeah.
I can talk. I don't hold back. I'll tell you what, I literally, and my people know, I just go ahead and it's just written a little more coherently in the book sometimes than what comes out of my mouth on these things. But, yeah, so that was a chapter I really, I had been writing so much about, like, so much of this letting this shame go was acknowledging and accepting God made me the way that I am on purpose. Like, it is not a mistake that this is a struggle for me, right? Like, this is how my brain works, that he made me creative. Thank you, God, for making me creative. Related to that is this struggle with, I don't see my space differently. Not that all creative people are messy, but most messy people are highly creative, right? And so acknowledging that God made me on purpose, I'm not broken, was huge for me. But at the same time, there is a tendency to go, oh, that's just the way I am. And people assume that means that I just leave my circumstances the way that they are, right? Like, that accepting myself means not trying to better it. Well, and I feel like that's another thing too, is I've written my other books about how to get a house under control. So there can be no incorrect assumptions that I'm saying it's fine to leave your house messy. But also I'm saying that the people who are reading my books, they don't need to be told that they already want their house to be better, right? Like, so I'm not going to assume, like, I can't stand it when people are like, you should really clean up your house, or, I guess they just like it that way. That's the most offensive thing. Because I was like, you would look around my house and think, well, I guess she likes living that way. And I hated it, but I couldn't figure it out, right? So I always want to take that away. That's not part of the issue. But other people hearing it here, accepting yourself must mean that you just, live with it being a mess. And I knew that wasn't the case. And so this is the reality of accepting how God made me, means that I accept the reality that my brain works differently from the brain of naturally organized people.
Right.
That's all great. But that also means that I don't have to feel like a failure because traditional, typical organizing advice failed miserably for me, right? Or I failed miserably at trying that advice. Instead, I just go, okay, if God made me this way, then there's a way to do this. I just got to figure out the way to do it that works with how God made me. And so I talk about the container concept. This is the actual concept that changed everything for me and for so many thousands of other people who I teach, right? So the very, very, very short version of this, and I've talked about it for literally hours everywhere online, but the very short version is space is finite. The size of the space is the size of the space. And if I try to keep more stuff than will fit in the space functionally, then there is no hope of it ever being under control, right? Like I just didn't see limits. It's a wonderful quality. Like I would just bring stuff into my house and be like, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, right? And there was more stuff than I could possibly ever have a place for. And so realizing, oh, okay, containers are meant to serve as limits, not just to shove things in, then that freed me and helped me to, it made it easy, right? Because I saw these boundaries as incredibly helpful for me because I didn't have to decide, is this a great water bottle? Is it better? I've got 16 water bottles and they're all wonderful. And this one I like for this reason and this one I like for this reason. But if the cabinet that I have is this big, that determines how many water bottles I can have.
Right.
Not whether I like them or not. Right? Like it doesn't matter. But before I just thought, well, I like this one. It's great. Why would I get rid of it? It's wonderful. And instead, when I'm just accepting the realities of this space, then that helps me go, okay, well, this one's my favorite and this one's my favorite and this one's my favorite. And the other ones are great, but it's just the way it is. It's truth.
Right.
The space that I have is the space that I have, and I don't have room for all 16. So I have to get rid of it. And something about that space, making that hard decision instead of me rejecting that item, is the thing that allowed me to actually be able to change my home, right? And so the spiritual parallel there is that I don't have to make all these decisions about everything. There's boundaries. There's so much room in there for me to be myself, for me to be who God created me to be, for me to not be like every other woman, not like every other Christian woman. Like we all don't look the same, and that's wonderful. But there are those boundaries that I get to go, okay, good. I don't have to make every decision on my own because there are things that are, God has given us as boundaries, right? And so the resting in those boundaries and seeing them as a benefit and as a help to me is incredibly powerful, right? So yes, I am made this way. And there are things that God has set up for me to be able to be fully myself within these, ways that he's created the world to work.
Well, and boundaries are, so many people think boundaries are to stop other people and to reject other people and say no and whatever. But boundaries, more than that, are peace for you.
Yeah.
They are guarding your heart and your mind and you physically, because we can OD if we don't have any. So yeah. I think that's great, especially to relate it to the literal physical confines of your home and what have you. And I follow the minimalists, and I follow this lady who her Instagram handle is Be More with Less. And I think her book says that too. And it's just so interesting how I bet it is freeing, because I've been divorced now. And so I'm in charge of everything, and houses, cars, our body, everything starts dying from the moment you get it. So everything's a money pit, too. So there's that.
Yeah.
So don't have so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's awesome. I liked the 1 in, 1 out rule as well. That sounded interesting. I've had people say phrases like, if you haven't used something for 6 months or for a year or whatever, that you need to get rid of that. But I like your rule a little better. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So the whole 6 months and everything, I'm like, my brain can spin out on that, because I'm like, well, but I would have if this had happened, and then blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, you know what? What space do I have? What deserves the space the most? That's just where I go. And then the 1 in, 1 out rule is, it's one of those things. I remember being in a mom's group when my kids were little bitty, and there was somebody speaking about, home organization and stuff. And somebody said to her, okay, but what do we do when we bring home a new pair of socks? What do we do? And she was like, oh, the 1 in, 1 out rule. And everybody was like, oh yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah. But I did not know what she was talking about. Like I was like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It makes no sense to me because I was picturing my sock drawer at home, which wouldn't even close because there were so many socks, like, outside of it was all piled up on this drawer that wouldn't even close because there were so many. And I was like, what good would it do to get rid of one pair of socks when I get a new pair of socks? Because it's not going to close anyway. Like it just didn't compute to me. I didn't say that out loud. I just thought it. And I just thought, that's dumb, whatever. Well, after I understood, oh, okay, every physical space in my home is a boundary, and my sock drawer is the size that my sock drawer is, and if I try to keep more socks than will fit in the drawer, then there's no hope of my space ever being under control. I was like, oh, okay. So once I decluttered down to the realities of that space, then all of a sudden the one in, one out made sense to me because I was like, oh, okay. So something new coming in order for it to have space, something else has to leave. And at that point, then I went, oh, okay. Where before I might have said, this is a perfectly good pair of socks. I need it. But when I say the space is full and I have this pair of socks I just bought, so I know that they're good, then I look at it and I go, oh, actually, that one right there always falls down inside my boots and gets on my nerves. And so that one I can let go because of that, where before it would have been fine to keep it because it fit in the space. But once the space is full, then that helps me with, the one in, one out. And it's that acknowledging again of those boundaries and realizing as things come in, there's only so much space and other things have to go out. And it's that reality of anything that comes in has to earn its space. It has to be container worthy. It has to be space worthy. That's my determining factor for something coming in my house. And it's the same thing. Like I have an identity as God's child, right? Like I have an identity as a Christian, a follower of Jesus. And so therefore bringing something into my life, it has to fit in that, right? Like that's it.
And not take space that belongs to Christ. It has to be aligned. Yeah.
Right. And does it fit into this identity versus, just, oh, this is a great thing. This is a great thing. This is a great thing. But if it doesn't fit into my identity as a follower of Jesus, then there's no space for it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's an absolutely wonderful analogy. I love all of that. Because I do, after following, like I said, the minimalists and stuff, I start looking around and I'm like, when I got divorced, my ex and I both had big closets, and I got the home because I fought for it. My daughter, this is the only home she's ever known. Well, I've now filled both closets. The one that was his. And I'm like, really, Michele?
Well, but see, that's the thing is yeah. But at the same time, when you're just going shoulds and shouldn'ts and, like, oh, I don't need all this, but, and so I'm like, hey, how big is the closet? Is it functional? Yeah. Because those are just facts. I mean, right. they're just accepting facts of the reality of, you know what? This closet is so full that I personally, with my own clutter threshold, what I can handle, I can't get stuff out and it not turn into this big mess. Okay, well, then I need to have less in there. I mean, it just, like, I've just kind of brought all these things down to just the reality of facing the facts, which helps me be able to not have to make all, because you talked about decision fatigue in the beginning, right? Like that decision fatigue is so much. And if I'm just saying, is this a good water bottle? Of course it is. Even if it's a little bit broken. And even if I have to drink it like this, I'm like, I can do that. I can make it work, Instead, it's like, oh, I only have this much space. Okay, then this thing doesn't deserve space over another thing that is, what it's supposed to be.
Functional or whatever, yeah. Mm-hmm. So awesome. I can't wait to get your book. This is just so much fun. Are you having any kind of a launch team, or you're with Thomas Nelson, so you probably don't need to?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of interviews set up. I have to write another book too after this. And I'm like, okay, when am I going to do that? Yeah, no, it's a little nuanced because my platform is not a faith-based platform. And so, it's nuanced in how I talk about it because I love my people passionately. I want them to know about Jesus, but I also know that, that's some people don't want to hear about it. And so there is a nuanced thing there, so I'm being very, I want to make sure that people know that this book exists, but also know that, I love them and I want, wherever they are on this journey that I hope and pray leads them to Jesus at some point. I want to be here on that journey. And if you just want to be here for the decluttering, you are absolutely welcome here. So it's a bit nuanced as far as, this book versus my other books where I'm like, listen, you came to hear about decluttering, you need decluttering speed of life, and I'm like, yes, you need, Jesus doesn't care about your messy house, but I know that people may need some time before they're willing to read that. But I also have people who, I mean, even though we haven't met in real life, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who was telling me, I think she's listened to one of my books like 400 times. And so she knows the sound of my voice, and so it's like that relationship is very real. And I want to honor that by sharing, my faith in Jesus, because ultimately that is the only thing that matters.
Absolutely. That's what I say exactly about not only my I only have one, but the other one coming, and my podcast it is not a Christian or religious podcast. It's faith-based because I am. Exactly. So I have had guests who aren't believers who have walked away saying, So isn't that our ultimate goal? I want to introduce them to Jesus, and I don't care what their current relationship status is with him.
Right.
I had a gentleman in the airport sitting next to me talk to me about why I was where I was and that I had written a book. And he goes, what do you say to people who tell you they're an atheist? And so it was so interesting. We had a great conversation. And then his 12-year-old son walks up behind us and he hears the tail end of it. And he goes, and I'm an atheist too. And I just want to ask you a couple questions. So he was asking me questions about why the Christian kids at his school couldn't answer his questions. And so he started asking me about why bad things happen and what have you. And when we got done, the young man looked at me and he goes, no one has ever answered me like you have and not made me feel bad or shamed for being an atheist. And I said, well, that is not my job. I go, my job is to introduce you to the God I do know. Yeah. And so it's so interesting. I think those are the types of appointments God has for us. And he does want it this way. We're not denying our relationship with Jesus. In fact, it's forefront. It's just that we're not going to have people feel like they're not welcome here if they don't happen to have one. So
right. And Jesus healed a lot of people who didn't, he didn't say, okay, here's the deal. Here's the transaction. He healed out of love for them. And I'm like, listen, all this stuff is there. All the ways for you to, learn about getting your house under control and all that. That's all there. And I want you to have that, whether you accept Jesus or not. But I do hope it opens up that relationship between us that allows me to share.
Okay, so the last thing I do with every one of my guests is I ask them what I call their little nugget. What is the one thing you wish you had been told or that you had discovered sooner?
I wish that I knew, and I don't want to say been told because my mom tried so hard, right? Like she tried so hard. But I wish that I knew that my issue was that I couldn't handle the amount of stuff that I could handle. And the issue was never that I needed to get organized. It was that I needed to have less stuff. Right. And so I always struggled and my mom would help me get it organized. Right. And in reality, we briefly mentioned clutter threshold, but that is the amount of stuff that I can handle. And if I try to have more stuff than that, there is no hope of it ever being under control, no matter how elaborate the system. I need non-elaborate systems and just less stuff. Right. Like I don't need a way to put all the different things away. I need there to only be 2 things to put away. Right. Like that's the actual thing. And so I wish that I had known that sooner, because that was the actual turning point for me, was realizing, oh, I don't need to get organized. I just need to declutter.
And and that's a great way that analogy that you put, because even if you had elaborate systems and you were able to fit a bunch of junk into something and shove it in a closet all neatly, it doesn't make it any less clutter if you're not using it and you're just cramming it somewhere. So
Well, and I couldn't maintain it.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
my mom is the type who can go into something like that and move 15 things and pull out the one she needs. I need that. And then it's just a big pile that stays there for a month. So it's better for me to just have the one thing I need and not all the others. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Narrow it down. Well, and that eliminates that decision fatigue, like we talked about too. And that can affect us so mentally, emotionally, and physically also. Well, you are a delight. I think you're hilarious.
Fun.
And I think that your journey, I mean, I can't even imagine. Probably 90% is underestimating who it could have an impact on, because like I said, even the people on the other side who think they're perfectionists and have it all organized still need to understand the same concept that you just said, that just less stuff is probably going to help our brain not explode.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, hon, and I will reach out to everybody and let them know when this is going to air. Now, when does your book come out? Or has it?
I think it's February 11th.
Okay. So
it's
as long
whatever,
as we're
it's either the
coming
11th or 12th, whatever the
coming
Tuesday
out
is.
in the vicinity of there, that would be great. Because I am looking after the beginning of the year, so perfect.
Yeah, and this is like decluttering. People like to talk about it in January big time. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Along with their diet and their exercise.
Yep, exactly.
All right, hon. Well, it's a pleasure meeting you, and I
so
will
fun.
reach out and let you know, and I can't wait to get your book.
Thank you. It's been
Have a great day. Take
too.
care. Well, thank you for coming to class today. I hope that you got some really cool information to kind of ponder over in regard to how you're wired and how you go about things, whether it's that you have a messy home or not, or whether you're a perfectionist or whatever it might be. There's messy in a lot of areas of our life, and I think they can be looked at in a very similar fashion. So I hope if you get the opportunity, you go get Dana's book. And if you like what's happening here in class, that you would go leave a review, a rate, a comment, a like, a subscribe, a bell, whatever you need to do. But I would just love the encouragement and love to hear from you. So thank you for coming to class today. And class dismissed. This episode of Old School with Michele Vrabel is brought to you by The Lathered Crown, a hair and scalp spa here in the Phoenix area.